Sam, thanks very much for coming into studio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an interesting document, and it's pretty much Tito Mboweni in fine form. He bypasses all protocols, puts it straight onto the Treasury website. Were you surprised by that?
I think the way it was handled is certainly a sign of the times. I mean, I don't think we would have seen anything like this be remotely considered under the Zuma administration, and it shows you a sign of the times that the Treasury is signaling that it is back with a bang. And this isn't the first document the Treasury publishes. They do often publish research on various issues affecting the economy and proposals to improve economic growth. But I think this is the first far-reaching and powerful document that we're seeing come out of the Treasury in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at this opening statement on the document. South Africa's current economic trajectory is unsustainable. Economic growth has stagnated. Unemployment is rising. Inequality remains high. We all know these facts, but it's quite a shock to see just the dire state of the economy, the state that we are in at the moment.
Yeah, I think we see them mention the new growth plan, somewhere mentioned in the document. I don't think initially we were never going to reach those growth targets, and if we look later on in the document, we see that we're targeting a much more conservative 2.3%, but it certainly does highlight the sort of realities we're facing as an economy, and the danger is the longer we continue along this growth path, the worse our growth outlook and our growth potential will become.
And you get the sense, just from the tone of the document, that we are in a state of emergency, our economy is.
Sure. I mean, things like the performance of state-owned enterprises, we see in the electricity column, we see they're talking about the over-reliance on municipal budgets. We know that it's a sort of a case of the few subsidizing the many, and the danger is that in an economy like South Africa, we find the reliance on the state growing faster than our tax revenue has increased. You know, we know the many problems SARS are facing in collecting tax revenue. So our revenue base continues to shrink, but those reliant on the tax revenue we collect is continuing to grow faster than we can grow our economy. And the danger with this is, well, as more and more people lose their ability to pay, we need to continue to support them. And unfortunately, this is where we run into big problems, and these problems are starting to kind of face us full on. Many economists were saying for the past 5 and even 10 years that this continuous kicking the can down the road as it was, and we saw this under the Zuma administration. It was you know, pushing infrastructure out for immediate term spending. Unfortunately, now we're at a stage where we can't really kick the can down the road, because we've heard things like the IMF are sort of waiting in the shadows to say, well, if we don't turn this around, we're going to have to turn to the IMF for a bailout package. And this is probably our worst case scenario in terms of the sort of the prosperity of the country if we have to turn to the IMF.
Yeah. Some of the other proposals in this document, I mean, they're quite practical. You know, he talks about reigniting tourism by using sensible visa regulations. There's a big focus on boosting small businesses. There's that suggestion to sell some Eskom power stations. Is there anything in the document that is a bit far-fetched for you, a bit a stretch too far, perhaps?
I think, you know, these proposals are nothing we haven't seen before. And economists and market analysts have been talking about this for quite some time, and hoping government would finally come about this and come about in enacting these reforms. In terms of far-fetched and practicality, I think let's maybe talk about the idea to sell our power plants. I think in practice and in theory, there are two different sort of ideas behind this. In theory, it's a very good idea that Eskom has been unable to maintain its fleet. They haven't spent enough on maintenance repair. It's resulted in a bloated organization. So the idea behind splitting it out, letting the private sector take control of management, of investment in power stations, is a very good idea, because I think the private sector in many ways would run power stations better than Eskom has been able to. The difficulty when we come to the practical application is, well, what independent private power producer would want to take on a system like we have, where you're having to invest into new power stations, but the revenue side isn't really coming. We see Eskom's biggest problems are that municipalities in rural areas are unwilling or unable to pay for electricity. And so you're going to have to convince these power producers, independent power producers, that if they were to invest, if they were to build new power stations, that there would be people on the other end paying for it. And it's a sort of a chicken and egg situation, I think, in that with an improved independent power producer, we would see lower tariff increases, because this is what's been killing small business, what's been killing the consumer is 8, 9, 10%. I think Eskom was asking for 15% in many instances, tariff increases. The consumer can't continue to bear these increases. So bringing on an independent power producer who can do this more efficiently, we might see lower tariff increases, which would benefit everyone. But we still need people paying on the other end. And in a low-growth environment like this, it's hard to see which one will be able to sort of come to the party first. The other thing I'd like to sort of talk about is they've highlighted, the Treasury has highlighted agriculture and tourism as its sort of big standard bearers for this growth prospect. Tourism I completely agree with. We have a very competitive advantage. We have a favorable currency, a favorable climate, and strong linkages to Europe, who are typically our biggest spenders. And I think also there is a lot of potential in new markets like West Africa, like East Asia, to come into the country and spend. However, we need to address the security issues. I mean, we saw it's a sort of reputational game where it takes a very long time to build up South Africa as a destination that's attractive, that's safe, and it's very easy to break down. When we saw the Hout Bay, that incident where the tourist was attacked and killed. So it's very easy to scare tourists off, and it takes a long time to bring them in. So we need to see the government committed to things like increased safety initiatives, things like that.
And agriculture?
Agriculture, yeah. I mean, I had a discussion with an agriculture economist the other day, and it's evident that the export sectors of agriculture, things like fruit, citrus fruit, nuts, avocados, are doing incredibly well on the export market. The Asian markets, the European markets really have a high demand for our products. But it does come with some sort of caveat, and the paper touts increasing labour-intensive sectors. Now, what this means is government wants to make agriculture more labour-intensive, bring in more workers to harvest, to farm these goods. Unfortunately, this isn't really how the world sort of, and not just agriculture, but many sectors of many industries are going, is they're moving to more capital intensive, more mechanization. Yeah. And we're seeing it in South Africa. Many of the successful farmers in regions like Tanin are spending a lot more on automated packing. They're doing the same amount, they're producing the same amount of fruit, or even more, with fewer employment. So the danger is that we're going in the opposite direction. We're trying to bring more workers into an industry that's continuing to mechanize. But I think this is certainly a point that we can grow, and grow significantly. As I said, the export market has been very strong, and the rand helps us. When the rand is at 17 to the euro, it benefits these kind of farmers. But there is no mention, or I didn't see any mention at least, of expropriation without compensation. Which
will obviously be a big issue that will have to...
This is going to drive away investment in not just agriculture. And unfortunately, I think in practice in theory it's very good, but in practice we need to see this commitment happen.
Yeah. Economist Sam Rowland joining us in studio. Thanks very much for your input and giving us some great analysis there on the various issues in the Finance Minister's blueprint of how we can turn the economy around.